midst of a huge transformation where peers, communities, and workplaces are all really melding into one. Welcome to Reimagining Company Culture. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager here at AllVoices. Today, I am super excited to welcome our next guest onto the interview series, Dave Landa. He is the CEO of Kintone Corporation. Dave, thank you so much for being here. If you want to share a little bit about yourself for our listeners, including your pronouns and when you were younger, do you remember how you answered the question, what do you want to be when you grow up?
Yeah, sure. Thanks so much for having me, Christina. Yeah, Dave Landa, he is CEO of Kintone Corporation, based in the Bay Area. I've been in software as a service for about 20 years now, and I'm specifically with Kintone for the last 7 now, and it's a Japanese public company. We're the U.S. subsidiary arm of it, and back before my days in SaaS, I actually lived and worked out in Asia for about a decade after studying Mandarin Chinese in Beijing as a student. Yeah, that's me. I've married 2 kids, 2 teenagers, and in terms of what do I want, what did I want to do when I grow up as a kid? I think I was pretty like sort of standard US boy. I had 2 older brothers who were sports playing brothers, and I had a dad who was a coach, volunteer coach of sports. So I think I pretty much wanted to be like a pro baseball, basketball, or football player when I was growing up. That was I played all 3 all through high school, and a couple of them still into college. And I think that dream kind of died hard. But I think relatively early on, I did start thinking more about like traveling and exploring. And I think that ended up kind of setting me on my course a little bit more so.
Yeah, absolutely. And I have so many questions about your work with Kintone and just about your professional career path. But is there anything else you would say defines you, Dave, as a person? I always like to ask.
Yeah, I grew up outside of New York and Connecticut. So, I guess personality wise, I get a mix where I kind of have a bit of that spirit and that energy of New York. Kind of, if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere, and that kind of tenacity, I guess. But most folks who know me will say you kind of have a Midwestern niceness or kindness to you. And that's because both my folks are from Chicago, from the Midwest, I think. So I kind of have that combination. But as I said before, I think ultimately, like my curiosity and sort of desire to explore and discover things is kind of what really drives me.
I'm sure your curiosity and desire to explore your role as CEO, there are a lot of different things going on in your mind at one time, a lot of different priorities. What would you say is taking up the most brain space in your mind right now?
Honestly speaking, I think it really is like company culture. Not to pander here, since this is
About company
the
culture.
show for it, but it really is. And just I've been thinking a lot about kind of the positive impact that corporate organizations can have on society through cultural um, intentions. I think I'm kind of blessed in being in an organization that has really been focused on company culture over the years, going back almost 17 years now. We have a pretty interesting origin story, but there's been a really deep focus on flexibility and transparency in our organization now for well over a decade. And it's something that I've been able to work on a lot here. And more recently, I was tipped to join our organizational strategy office, which is a global office, which is really focused on developing not only our culture internally, but also sharing it externally. So it is taken up a lot of my brain space, thinking about our tools, our methods, the different the different aspects that are out there, and learning and sharing. So that is
Yeah.
key right now for me.
I mean, that's enough. That's enough. The big questions of company culture. And I think organizations, to your point, are like a microcosm of society and kind of your role in impacting the lives of people day to day. One of the things you mentioned was around that flexibility. I know there's a ton of conversation around, especially parents with newborns to 18-year-olds, really craving that flexibility from their workplace. I saw in April 2020, we're now in 2022, you wrote a LinkedIn post about 7 tips for working from home parents from a busy CEO and your team about setting boundaries and intentional scheduling and other kind of tips for parents. Since we
Mhm.
are in 2022, is there anything that you would add to that list of learnings, knowing what we know now but also not knowing what the future holds?
Yeah, it seems like such a long time ago, doesn't it? Wow. Yeah, I think that was right at like 4 or 6 weeks after we kind of all went into lockdown there,
Yeah.
somewhere like April 2020. And I had my own experience with a couple of, I guess at the time they're like 13 and 15 teenagers. They were at home, schooling from home. We were all at home, my wife. And that article is really meant to kind of share more, from the parent's perspective, right? Not necessarily company or leaders' perspective, but more from
Right.
a parent's perspective, how to kind of things to think about and elements to deal with. And we are lucky enough, I think we have over 25% of our team has children, not, let alone 18, under 5 years old, I think, on our team. So it's a pretty, common demographic, parents with young kids in our team. So, when I think about those, I'm trying to think back some of those aspects, like have those meals with your family you hadn't been able to have in the past, and get those mid-time family breaks and such. So I think things have evolved in that, most kids are now back at school, I guess. A lot of us are still working from home most of the time. Um, for me, I think uh, more aspects of how, as a company, we can support the flexibility of folks and encourage folks to bring their sort of true selves, and bring their unique scheduling characteristics to the table, and try to accommodate for those as best we can as a team and as an organization. um, I think, yeah, I don't really have any more for the parents. We had like 7 or 8
Yeah.
items there that were really all about embracing the opportunity, as opposed to like getting frustrated with it, because there's so many opportunities too. So I think it's still about embracing. Um, I know I use this term about crisis a lot. The Chinese term for crisis, which is a combination of danger and opportunity. And I
Mhm.
think I always like to think about crises in that way. Like, yeah, there's some danger, but think about the opportunity we might be able to draw out of it. And as long as you have that mindset, I think you're going to be able to find, good things that you can pull from any situation as best you can.
I think over the past 3 years, a lot of companies have taken that opportunity and really invested in supporting the parents of the organization. And definitely want to touch on that company level to ask, how does Kintone kind of uniquely support working parents, that 25% plus population of your internal employees?
Yeah. So we have like 4 teamwork culture elements that we talk about a lot, that are kind of the foundation of what we think is really good teamwork. And one of those is embracing individuality.
Mhm.
And I think that the most important thing when you're, dealing with parents, and you're dealing with an organization in general, is to recognize that everybody's an individual. And that's something our parent company did a long time ago. Again, like 17 years ago, they rolled out a concept of 100 different people have 100 different work styles. So we try to be as individualistic in our approach with our different team members in terms of what their schedule is like. And we try to encourage our managers to work with individuals to figure out schedules that work for the team, of course, for the individual. Um, and so I think, one guy in my organizational strategy office team just recently had a boy just a few months ago, and he decided to take a few weeks off, not that long of paternity leave, but he wanted to stay engaged, and that's okay, whatever time they want. Um, but he also decided that he was going to work with his wife in terms of managing the baby so that he kind of had the late shift.
Right.
And so he wanted to check and see if we could work, a few meetings here and there, a schedule so he could start on noon and then, work later into the evening. And so, yeah, we kind of, we worked with them, we made it work. And so having that like mindset of flexibility is key. Another woman who had a young child who, when the pandemic kicked in, he could no longer go to daycare, and she was having a hard time at home. She's a full-time salesperson for us. She was having a hard time at home managing, daycare and working from home. Husband was working full-time from home as well, and it was just a challenge. And so she kind of reached out and said, "Hey, I think I just need to move part-time. Can we go part-time for a while? And I need to coordinate with my husband to work these times." And so it's just really having that mindset to work with folks. So she was able to do that, I think, for about a year and a half, and she's recently come back full time again, as everything's a little bit, not totally back to normal, but a little bit back. So really the key is having that flexibility. We have some policies as well to support that, but I think more than anything else is having that desire and that mindset to support folks and be flexible with their needs.
Yeah, I think those are two really good examples of embracing that individuality, and also something that a lot of folks are talking about, that personalization at scale, having these conversations, asking what people want and need, because everybody is different in that as well. In
Mhm.
terms of thinking about that personalization, the employee experience, in terms of company culture, how do you think about measuring company culture quantitatively and quantitatively? Are there any metrics that you look to? Is it these anecdotes that you were talking about as well, in terms of identifying flexibility, and how do you keep a pulse on what's happening?
Yeah, yeah, I think definitely trying to keep some measure of how folks are experiencing the culture is critical. We do we do NPS, Net Promoter Score, internally every month, with our team, to kind of gauge how things are going at sort of a macro level. But what we also do in those NPS ones is encourage our team members to share any thoughts as well they may have, any issues, concerns, and they can do it in a pretty, sort of psychologically safe way, where they can choose to either enter it anonymously, or they can, share their name, and they can choose to either, it's just something I wanted to share and I don't want to talk about it, or, I want to talk with someone about this issue. And so we try to create that sort of combination of a little bit of, quantitative with qualitative, I think is critical. Um, Obviously, things like employee turnover is a natural measure, and we pay attention to that. That's really what sort of set our organization on its way toward this more this greater focus on company culture and employee first. Was back in like 2005. Our parent company had this. They were a really fast charging software company based in Tokyo, and they had a work around the clock type of mentality. And they hit, after about 5 years after going public, they hit a turnover rate of almost 30%.
Yeah.
And like, they realized that this isn't going to last. It was kind of an existential crisis, and that's when they, really started focusing on. They came up with the concept of 100 different people have 100 different work styles, and then started focus not only on policies but methods and frameworks for supporting people's more flexible work styles. And I think, just looking at employee turnover is sort of a reasonable, metric to keep an eye on. Yeah, we do. We have other programs that we have rolled out here in the U.S. and in Japan as well, in our other offices, around trying to encourage folks to share problems. We call it problem sharing, and then we have a related problem solving, and sort of decision making, all meant to be very transparent. Um, and just sort of keeping tabs on those problem sharing and problem solving issues and working on those is another way to kind of, more qualitatively have a gauge on how folks are doing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it sounds like there's a multitude of ways that you are kind of asking these questions, both in a structured and unstructured data way to get those qualitative metrics as well, which is really important in continuing to ask. I'm a big believer that everyone who is a part of the organization is a culture champion, no matter what department, what level. But I do like to ask, as kind of the chief executive of Kintone, do you see yourself playing a unique role in being a shepherd of the culture, and thinking about your role in really leading the company?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think you can't you can't mandate culture as a leader, right? You can't just say it and it'll be, but you do have to very clearly express it, articulate it, and then kind of design activities, design policies, design your sort of methods and tools to try to pursue that culture, and to continually expose team members to the culture that you do intend to have for the organization. So it really is, you can let culture just happen, right? But then, it could, you never know where it's going to go, quite frankly. So as a leader, you really do need to take some positive action, to try to help guide and build and grow that culture. So I think, you also just need to lead by example, right? If you're saying something, you need to lead by example. So I think you can lead by example, you can kind of teach and support. And then I think, learning and improving is a really critical thing for a leader too, is learning from team members, hearing from them, what's working, what's not working, what should we be doing? Oh, you say we're supposed to be doing this, but what I'm experiencing is that, but having those conversations and learning and improving. So I think really critical things for leadership.
Yeah, that active listening is super important. Modeling the behavior. One of my favorite examples is if you have unlimited PTO at your organization, but none of your managers, none of your executives are taking time off. What does that really
Hmm.
mean as well? So people are taking note of that. In terms of the positive action you're talking about and having those conversations with folks, are there any KPIs you look to say, okay, I'm measuring the effectiveness on my leaders and thinking about other executives too? How do you kind of look at kind of their end goals?
Yeah, yeah, that's an interesting question. We've been working on that a bit. I mean, obviously, for-profit business, you're going to have the standard KPIs that are kind of critical and unavoidable, growth and revenues and such. But interestingly, getting back to the turnover, when I started, I was the first hire for Kintone over 7 years ago now, and it's software, it's a SaaS company. And so my focus was putting a team together fast, growing the business fast, finding our market, all of the sort of traditional things. And we were growing fast. But about 3 or 4 years into it, we also recognized that we were having a bit of a turnover issue.
Right.
Um, and it's hard to avoid in the Bay Area in software, but it was definitely higher than it should have been. And my founder and CEO actually said, like, listen, it's important to be successful here, to grow the business. You got to make a profit, but culture is really important to us, and I think it's about time to really more intentionally sharing and building our culture here in the U.S. Even though we were still pretty small at the time, that it was really interesting that he kind of took me aside and said, it's time to really put some more effort into this, and we're going to start translating more of the work we've been doing in Japan for the US market, and we're going to start sharing this, and we're going to start trying to create, it's going to be a little bit different, obviously, because it's a whole different country, but we're going to start trying to really work on the culture. So again, I was kind of measured by my turnover rate a little bit, in that case. But what we have done more recently, in terms of more across the board, we actually implemented a kind of a campaign we call "Anyone Can Be a Board Member," and it's a it's actually a sort of an application and a process for all of our different team members in the organization to provide feedback, not so much on the decisions that were made by leadership, but on the process for the decision making that they followed in making the decisions. Because we, again, talk a lot about that flexibility. We talk a ton about transparency. We have a Japanese term called a kome seidai, which is open and clear and honest and loud. And it's just it's a phrase essentially meaning transparency, but with a little bit more nuance to it. But the idea is, we want folks making decisions as open as possible, as distributed as possible, letting as many team members involved in the process, and at least letting team members know why the decision was made, and having the responsibility to answer any questions about it. And so this relatively new initiative is really 100% focused on measuring the effectiveness of executives and leadership. And because we think about decision making as kind of the core of or any organization, right? Leadership in an organization all comes down to decision making. And so let's have our team members measure our leadership on how they make decisions and how those decisions are articulated and how they're shared. So.
Yeah, I mean, that's a huge part of transparency and effective communication, explaining the why, providing the context behind why this is the decision right now, and having that two-way conversation. And you mentioned too, in terms of measuring effectiveness, asking why people are leaving the organization and why they're staying at the company, what drives them to come to work every day, what part of their work is fulfilling. And this has come up a lot throughout our conversation as well, but that active listening piece. And I want to ask you how you see employee feedback management as a really important tool to continually build that culture of listening as well.
Yeah, I think it's an absolutely critical part, right? I think it's not just about the listening, right? But it's absolutely critical to create the tools, again, and sort of the methods to hear and get the feedback, again, be it problem sharing, be it NPS, be any variety of different methods that folks can use to get that feedback. But then it's having a relatively clear and open process for resolving those issues. We have we call it the aspiration engine, which is essentially a problem solving methodology in which we try to bring our teams together. We have quarterly meetings, and we'll always try to carve out some time to discuss issues that have been raised, and have small breakout teams work on these issues and work on solving these problems by identifying the causes and then figuring out the action items and assigning folks who are responsible for those. But what it does, it shows that, not only are we sort of seeing the issues being raised and we're hearing feedback from folks, we're actually spending the time and effort to try to talk through them, work through them. And if there's something that we can, really get the folks who are responsible for aspects of these issues to start working on those, then we actually, create a process for that. And we do that transparently, as much as possible. Obviously, if it's a personnel or a personal issue, then we need to have that confidentiality. But if it's anything other than that, we always, by default, transparent, by default, open. And so I think critical not only to listen, but to actually show that you're taking action, that you're hearing, and you're marshaling, resources to address the ones that are important, and and even address all of them, even to say like, oh, at this point we don't have resources to work on this, or next quarter, or whatever it is, response to that issue. And that's another one of kind of our maxims, which is having a responsibility to ask. If you see an issue, raise your hand and ask, but also having a responsibility to answer if someone asks you something. So,
do you have any favorite examples of how you have answered kind of an employee's feedback and you were able to change a process or initiative or strategy, even if it wasn't tomorrow after the person asked, but anything that inspired a change organizational wise?
Yeah, we've had a number of those. I think one that stands out was actually just our bonus system. So someone brought up that like, I don't like our bonus system. It's not clear enough. I'm not exactly sure how everyone's is calculated. It seems a little too subjective for me. I don't know when it's coming exactly. There's a bunch
Yeah.
of different things. And we had a couple of sessions around that. I really worked through it and had everyone who was interested sort of participate in how they could. And we identified that, yeah, that, there was some subjectivity in the decision making, and that there was maybe more individualism than the team wanted in the bonus. Um, and so we ended up completely transforming our bonus process and our bonus calculation. And it became much more of a team driven one that was based on very clear calculations and with a very clear timeline, and review and payout. And so we basically sort of went through this whole process to understand what everybody wanted, and then kind of come to maybe not 100% everybody agreed, but like as large a consensus as we could have gotten, and then moved forward with a brand new bonus plan, which was really really team driven and much less individual driven, which was a bit challenging for salespeople in particular, right? That's not what they're used to, that sort of model. But I think in the end, it really brought the team together, and just the process of everyone sort of sharing their opinions on it really, really helped.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a huge one related to bonus structure and comp for people as well. Talk about impacting, people's day-to-day lives. I know we've been talking a lot about data, and I want to ask, especially in an asynchronous environment, a global organization, nobody likes surprises at work. And sometimes you do have these quote unquote, what we like to call, these hidden dangers of misalignment, good values, someone who's perhaps not embracing individuality and needs a little bit more resources and investment in time. How do you kind of keep a pulse on what's happening and identifying those to make sure you're investing in kind of those folks and making sure that everybody is actually aligned?
Yeah, good question. I do think some of the things I mentioned, I think it's a variety of things. Some of the things I mentioned, like the NPS, the ability for folks to share, this problem sharing. We actually have a term for that one too, Japanese term called moya moya,
Mhm.
which means kind of an idea that's not super clear. It's a little bit cloudy. But the idea is, if there's something that's kind of nagging at you or bothering you, you know, put it down, write it down. Maybe it's not super clear yet. You don't have to share it with anyone yet, but put it into this structure, and maybe only share it with, one or two people, and maybe together you can, articulate it better, or really flesh it out more. Um, but I think having a variety of different ways for folks to reach out. So again, NPS, this problem sharing. We have regular weekly meetings where people, can raise issues up, either, the things that they're doing, or also the things that are challenging them now. We have also, direct communication into HR. We have an app where folks can share issues that they have only to individual people. So we try to create that psychological safety through these different channels so that folks feel comfortable sharing. And the other one I mentioned, like anyone could be a board member. That's kind of a that's more, what are we doing that now, every 6 months? So some are more, anytime folks can comment. Then we have kind of a weekly option, and then we have the NPS monthly option. So I think just trying to create a variety of channels for folks to be able to reach out when it's top of mind,
Right.
when they're in the mood, when it's meaningful for them, and when they're comfortable doing it. And so I think it's just thinking about that variety, which is the key that I found.
Offering those different channels. Not everybody is going to feel comfortable coming to Dave and providing that feedback. Not everyone will feel comfortable right when they join an organization. So again, setting up the structure for success and feedback. This one is a little bit more of a broader question, but if you had a magic wand, what would make your day easier, Dave?
Oh gosh, magical. I think about this a lot. It's been 2 years now that we've been, more or less remote. And we going back 17 years ago, we've been talking about flexible work styles and everyone being able to work where they see fit. Um, I do miss, and I do think in some ways, certain aspects of my role would be easier if we had the opportunity to get together more often in person as a team, or larger chunks of our team, to be honest. So if I were to wave a wand, I think I would be able to see the team more often on a regular basis in person, and be able to have some of those conversations that is difficult to have on a one-on-one Zoom even, but certainly on any kind of group gatherings that are remote. So to me, that's kind of the biggest thing when I think about it right now.
Yeah, absolutely. It's like a nice mix of both being able to see people in person, really collaborate, and also have that flexible schedule too, have those expectations. I know that in terms of organizations and leaders, CEOs, people are doing things differently. Business as usual is out the door. And even with the best intentions, people are bound to make mistakes. So without naming any names, are there any common mistakes you see CEOs making right now in terms of what we talked about, not actively listening or thinking about company culture in a different way? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think one thing is I think sometimes folks think about cultural imperatives, especially these days around like diversity and inclusion, and uh, critical to establish elements in your organization to support those. But I do sometimes think leaders are thinking about those in a more superficial surface way. And I guess I would just caution leaders to if you're going to approach those topics, that you should really think about it pretty deeply, and think about uh, underlying tools and methods, and the culture that you're developing, um, to be able to support those. Yeah, I think I've been, again, fortunate enough in the organization that I've been in, that we've been talking for years and years about flexibility and providing an opportunity for different folks to be able to have a flexible work style, which in its own way kind of creates the opportunity for diversity. um, and then our transparency, uh, trying to engage and encourage as many people on our team to participate and have open access to information,
Right.
and be able to give their inputs and opinions in on decisions. And so having that inclusion kind of built into some of the elements of the culture, that if you really want to work on diversity and inclusion and ultimately equity, I think you need to think about your organization at kind of a foundational level, and what are the most important values, as opposed to just putting up a few um, quota policies or things of that nature, because I think the organization will struggle if the culture is not created to accept diversity and accept inclusion at its core. So I think that's something that I would caution folks to be careful of.
I think that's a good kind of call to action as well, and go deeper than that surface level. Make sure you're thinking about the why behind these decisions too, and really baking it, operationalizing equity into the culture, and intentionally thinking about these decisions. And that relates to, February 2022. I definitely want to ask how Kintone is honoring and celebrating Black History Month this year.
Yeah, good question. And quite transparently and honestly, I don't have a really good answer in terms of how we're truly celebrating it right now. It's not, I guess, well, I can say it's January still, but we're one day away. Um, Last year we had a working group in which we actually gave presentations and chatted a lot about African American history, American Black history in America. And I think there are a lot of folks on our team, because we are a subsidiary of a Japanese company, a lot of folks, Japanese American or Japanese expats, who really, they were learning a lot of new historical information as we were sharing that. So, a lot of it was education last year. Um, we've encouraged folks to participate in a variety of different nonprofit activities. Um, but I think you've given me a to-do this week, which is to talk with our team about what sort of things we can actually pursue this month in alignment with Black History Month. But yeah, quite transparently, I know we don't have anything major planned right now.
I think that education piece and those examples are really great because that is also part of the kind of the celebration and the honoring that's happening too. So I'll look forward to seeing what Kintone internally and externally will be doing there. Dave, is there anything that I either didn't ask that you want to share, or one to two key insights you want to underscore for our listeners?
Yeah, maybe so. I guess one thing I was thinking about as we were going through, and I mentioned a little bit about it, like this idea that you can't mandate culture, right? The other phrase I've heard before is like culture is like the wind, right? You can't see it, but you can certainly feel it. When it's at your back, things tend to be a lot easier, right? If it's in your face, everything becomes a lot more difficult. Um, but you do, again, you can't mandate it, but you really do have to be very intentional uh, about articulating it and sharing it and creating the policies and the tools and the methods to build it and grow it and expose new team members to it in a regular basis.
Mhm.
And continually, it's not like you put it in place and it's there. You kind of have to continually go back to it, continually come up with new ways of sort of getting folks in that mindset of your culture, and keep it fresh, but keep it persistent.
Yeah.
And it really does, it is work. You really don't want culture to kind of develop on its own and kind of run on its own, because you never know what direction it'll go. And so as long as you're kind of laying the outline and then trying to support folks in growing that culture in the organization, then I think that's the key there.
Yeah, intentionality, authenticity, modeling by example, active listening, all the things that we talked about is really important to continually building it. We're not a set it and forget it kind of strategy here. Dave,
Yeah,
thanks so much for being on Reimagining Company Culture this afternoon.
you got it. It was a pleasure, Christina. Thank you so much. It was fun chatting.
Of course, and as a reminder for folks who are listening, at AllVoices, we really believe in employee feedback management as a requirement for the organization to succeed overall. Have a great rest of your afternoon, everyone.